So in this video, we're going to look at what I like to call the brute force approach to stray hair removal, and that's basically just taking a large chunk of the background and covering up the stray hair with it. So in this particular image, we would not want to use our individual hair removal techniques, simply, cloning and stamping, or using the healing brush if we want to remove all of these different areas of hair around the side of the face. So that is particularly difficult in this image just because we don't have an even background behind us. We have this area of shadowing here, so if we wanted to actually remove that using something like Clone Stamp, it wouldn't really be practical because we could never get the background looking natural. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to kind of stretch out the background in order to cover it, and then we're just going to mask in the areas we want to have covered and hide the areas we don't want to cover. So in the end, we're going to look something like this. Now, obviously, depending on what the background is, sometimes you can or cannot stretch it. Generally speaking, if it's shot in studio like this image, I kind of actually even prefer the look of this because we don't have this gap of white here before we have the shadow. So it kind of actually looks better in my opinion. But obviously, depending on the situation, if you're not the photographer here, you may need to make sure that it's okay to actually cover up that portion of the background. Another technique that I've sometimes used is if I don't have anything to sample off this side, I might grab a background from the other side of the image if there's a good clean piece there, and then just kind of flip that over. Or if you've got other images to work off of where we have a piece of the background that we can use, we would open that, grab an area of the background and drop it in here and manipulate it from there. So there's lots of different things that you can do, but the gist of this technique is what I'm going to show you in this particular video. So let's go ahead and cover this up. And what we need to do before we actually start this is get as clean an area as we can find. So let's just duplicate our background. And what we're going to do is just make sure we clean up anything that is individual hairs encroaching on our sample area. So what our sample is basically anything that is clean that we can use to copy or to stretch out over top of our hairs. So let's get rid of as many hairs as we can using our healing brush. So click J, and we're just going to heal out the hairs that we feel we can easily remove from the background. So something like that. You don't have to be too careful here because we're actually going to cover all of this anyways. But I'm just trying to reveal as much of a clean area to work with as I can. So that's pretty good. We can get rid of some of this here. Good enough. Again, you can see that's not perfect, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to select around that. And then if we want to as well, I mean, I can stretch any amount of this, but something like this is probably okay to just remove using Clone Stamp. So I'm going to grab my Clone Stamp tool and just tidy up this area here so we don't have to mask over it. I mean, ultimately, the less we have to cover, the better. So anything you can do using the traditional method of Clone Stamp and Healing Brush, you may as well do it. And then we'll grab our Healing Brush to take care of the rest of this. All right, that's good enough. This area here I'm actually going to cover up. So I just want a fairly uniform shape area. The more uniform you can make it, the better. I don't want to have to select around these hairs here. I know I'm going to cover this whole area anyway, so I just want a clean sample area that I can work off of. And you'll see what I mean in a second once we actually manipulate this background. We've got a nice clean area all along this side here. So basically everything here is good to go as far as an area to select out. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to grab our lasso tool and we're going to make a selection. And you can really select anything you want because the mask will ultimately refine it afterwards. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a straight selection through here. Anything that doesn't have hairs going through it. Something like this. And then we're going to hit the Q key to bring up our quick mask. And then we're going to feather this out a little bit. So we'll go with blur, Gaussian blur, and just pick a reasonable feather. This just kind of creates a softer edge so that we don't have to worry about hard edges as we stretch this out. So something like 20 is good. And then one thing I want to do also is if I hit Q again, you can see that there's a little bit of a transition here with lightness and shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and back in my quick mask mode, I'm going to hit the gradient tool. So hit G to bring up the gradient. Make sure you've got a black to transparent gradient selected. Painting in black, we're going to go ahead and just swipe down this. And actually, let's go ahead and start it a little bit lower here. Something maybe like that, and then like that. And this will just create a softer transition when we stretch this out. So we've got our selection now. We're ready to actually go ahead and grab this background and sort of stretch it out. So hitting Command or Control J is going to duplicate that out, and Command or Control T will give us our transform tools. So now we're going to just stretch this out to the side, just making sure we stretch it out enough so that we cover all areas that have hair. So something like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the warp tool to just get rid of it in this area here, because again, the less we have to stretch, the better. So let's right click, select warp, and just kind of pull this back, because ultimately we don't need to cover all of this area here. Let's only cover what we actually need to cover. So that's going to be fine, I think, something like that. And just hitting enter to apply that. So now we've got our base that we can continue working off of. But the next thing we have to do is refine our mask, and we can do that in a variety of ways. We can go ahead and either select out the subject using something like quick select and then refine mask, or we can pen tool it, or we can just simply use a brush and just paint in white and black, hiding parts, revealing parts. It's up to you how you want to do this. What I'm going to do is I think I'm just going to start by using the pen tool to make a rough outline, and then I'm going to refine using just a standard paintbrush in black and white afterwards, because we see that we will have to refine it simply because we have some areas that are on the focal plane like this that have a very sharp edge, and then we have some areas, particularly over here, that are quite soft because they're further away from the focal plane. So trying to do this in one shot using something like the pen tool is not going to work for us. So I'm going to use the pen tool as a starting point, and then from there we'll refine using the brush. So I'm going to grab the pen tool here, and we're going to start pen tooling out this particular area. And I don't have to be perfect here because, again, I'm going to refine this afterwards using my brush. So I just more or less want to make sure that I get a fairly clean selection, but it does not have to be perfect. And I really only need to go up to the area that we're going to be masking in, which is pretty much up here. I'm not going to be really doing anything else. That is fine there. Let's go ahead and zoom out. And let's just kind of make sure we get all of the subject in there. And there's our path. So now what we can do is make a selection from that path. So if we go into paths, we've got our path over here. And from there, we can just make a selection of it. So hitting the Command key. And then I'm going to go back into Q and just give it a little bit of feather. So in quick mask mode, we're going to add a tiny bit of blur. Let's say 4 pixels or so. Should be good, I think. And then getting out of quick mask mode, now we can go back and enable our coverage layer. And from there, we're going to hit the mask icon over here, and we're going to invert that mask. So just invert it. And as you can see, we're kind of getting to where we want to be, but obviously it's far from perfect. So now what we can do is go ahead and actually refine this. And one thing I like to do is just make a duplicate copy of that layer, just in case I completely screw up the mask. I just have something that I can work off of. So this is going to be our good one. This one we're eventually going to discard, but for the time being, we're going to keep it. So we can see areas here that just need to be cleaned up. So we're going to go ahead and grab our brush tool, and we're going to paint in white first so that we cover up this particular area here. And we know that this area was quite soft because it was off the focal plane, so we need to match our brush to that. So let's go ahead and use something like a 25% flow rate and a brush, I would say, in and around 30% hardness. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of paint over this like so. And it's okay if you encroach on the skin a little bit. That'll just kind of keep things looking nice and natural. Ultimately, only you will know that you painted out part of the skin. And if you find you get it wrong, just switch to painting in black and kind of go inside the skin and mask it out. This is sort of an iterative process until you feel that you've got it perfect. Just working back and forth until it looks good. The reason we have a little bit of highlight here is because originally, if you look at the background here, it was white. So we need to kind of make sure that we cover that in a fairly natural way. And obviously the bigger you make your brush size, the softer the edge will become. So you can go ahead and kind of taper in with a larger brush if you find that you need to soften that edge even more without actually adjusting your softness. And then again, we can go in black and just kind of paint that out until we're happy with what we have. All right, so that's that area there. And as we shrink this down, we're kind of naturally making the edge a little bit harder as well. So that'll work fine for this area that is not quite as soft as the area we were just painting. And again, I got to get my brush a little bit small here just to kind of deal with these corners. But I think that's pretty good. Everything along here is looking pretty good. Maybe just kind of deal with this edge, and I think I might even zoom in a little bit for that. And again, here we need to tighten this up a tiny bit. And then I'm just going to paint black on the inside portion here just to make sure that this edge is just a little bit harder. And again, kind of back and forth, just painting black and white until you're happy with the edge that you have there. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look at our work there. And so obviously that is a much easier solution to trying to remove those hairs than it would be if we were to clone stamp or heal or something along those lines. And like I said, you can be creative with it depending on where you can get this source area from, whether it's a previous image, the other side of the image, the top of the image flipping to the bottom, whatever kind of works in that situation. Ultimately, what you need to do is just make sure that you can blend with the background anywhere that you are, because at some point it's going to connect with another part of the background. And make sure that, you know, if we have an area here that was, let's say the skin was against pure white, we obviously don't want to cover it with pure black, because then the highlight that kind of encroaches on the skin will not look natural. So you want to find something that is, you know, relatively close in luminosity to what the original background was, so it doesn't really stand out too much. And of course, we can further combine this in different scenarios. So if we wanted to remove all of these hairs up here, what we could do is perhaps grab an area from this side, duplicate it, flip it to this side, stretch it over, and then again mask out this edge so we only see the hairs we want. And then to make that edge look natural, we'll paint back additional strays just like we showed in the previous video. So it's all about really, you know, kind of finding a good strategy within that image that minimizes the amount of time you have to spend. So this is just another tool to add to your bag of tricks.